Imagine you're handed the keys to just a massive multi-billion-dollar real estate portfolio. I mean, you've got thousands of employees, hundreds of regional offices, and this global, incredibly high-stakes mission.
Right. It's a huge operation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so imagine you sit down at the executive desk, you pull open the drawer, and you find out that the corporate rule book for running this entire empire hasn't actually been fully unified since, like, 1981.
Oh, man, that is a terrifying thought.
Right.
You just have 40 years of, patchwork fixes and memos.
Handshake agreements.
Yeah, exactly. Handshake agreements just desperately holding the entire structure together.
Well, and that is exactly why we're here today.
Right.
Because we are opening up the hood on exactly that kind of massive machinery. Because, when we talk about church governance, and specifically a massive national church body looking at its structural and administrative rules, we are not just talking about some dry theoretical exercise.
No, not at all.
We're looking at a system that has to somehow balance history, massive property liability, and, deeply personal human relationships. And it has to do all of that while trying to execute a global mission.
And that balance, it is incredibly fragile.
Right.
Because you pull one lever over here to, say, protect a bank account, and you might accidentally just shut down a rural church plant.
Oh, well, yeah.
Or, you tighten a rule on representation, and you might accidentally disenfranchise half a state without even realizing it.
So to get into this, we're taking all the materials on the table for this massive structural overhaul. So we've got today's business, Issue 1, the Convention Workbook, and a highly specific Committee 9 Amendment Guide.
That's a lot of reading.
It is a massive stack of source materials, and we're going to unpack exactly how this machinery works. But look, before we get into the heavy legal text, we really need a lens to look through.
Absolutely.
Because if you just sit there and read a list of corporate bylaw changes, your eyes are going to glaze over in about 4 seconds.
Which, ironically, is exactly what happens on a convention floor if you aren't careful.
So true. So our lens for this deep dive today is a concept from the sources called kingdom over castle.
I love this concept.
It's simple, right? But profound. The idea is that every single structure, every bylaw, every corporate entity needs to be evaluated on whether it serves the kingdom, meaning the local congregations and the gospel mission,
Right.
or on the flip side, whether it just builds a castle, creating unnecessary centralized control.
And to actually measure that, the guide introduces a really helpful metric. We have to look at the resources the church actually possesses. And importantly, it's not just money.
Right, there's more to it.
There are 5 capitals at stake here.
Okay, lay those out for us.
So first you have spiritual capital. That's the doctrine, the supervision, the confession, the actual gospel purpose.
Yeah, the core of why it all exists.
Exactly. Then you have relational capital, which is the trust, the trust between a local congregation and the national office, or between districts and boards.
Which can be super fragile.
Oh, incredibly fragile. Third is physical capital, the literal brick and mortar structures, the offices, the committees, the real estate holding companies.
Okay.
Fourth is intellectual capital. This is the mental energy, the clarity of the bylaws, the data, the governance authority itself.
I feel like we spend a lot of intellectual capital just trying to understand these bylaws.
We really do. And finally, the 5th one is financial capital. So costs, risks, liabilities, budgets, basic stewardship.
Okay, so as we dig into these 17 proposed resolutions today, we're going to impartially look at how they impact those 5 capitals. And I want to be really clear up front here. We are not taking sides on the internal politics of, centralization versus local congregational autonomy.
Right, we're just analyzing the mechanics.
Exactly.
Yeah.
We are strictly looking at the mechanics provided in the source material to equip you for the convention floor. What is the opportunity? What is the risk? And what are the actual tactical maneuvers the guide provides to keep the focus on low control and high accountability?
Because ultimately, if a structural change releases those 5 capitals, you're building the kingdom.
Right.
But if it traps them behind layers of bureaucratic red tape, you're just fortifying the castle.
Okay, let's unpack this. How do we keep the focus on low control and high accountability? Let's start with the absolute heaviest piece of machinery on the docket.
Oh boy, here we go.
Because, before you talk about people or power, you kind of have to talk about liability, right?
You really do.
If your legal foundation is cracked, everything else just falls right into the basement. So we are talking about the complete overhaul of corporate formation. This is Resolutions 9-11 and 9-16.
Yeah, this is the governance mammoth.
It really is.
On the docket, it's this massive rewrite of Bylaw 1.5, which is the foundational rule book for how the church creates legal entities.
So let me set the scene for this for you. Right now, the rules for how the national church or its agencies create new corporations, they're just scattered all over the place.
Right.
Like we said, some date back to a resolution from 1981.
And just imagine what corporate law looked like in 1981 compared to today.
Seriously. So the proposal on the table, 9-11, it completely unifies this. It creates a brand new framework for what it calls instrumental entities.
Right. It splits them into two types.
Yeah, it divides them up into special purpose entities, which are SPEs, and passive investment entities, PIEs.
PIEs, yeah.
And to manage all of this new structure, it requests a $200,000 annual budget to hire a new full-time governance and compliance officer.
Okay, and we really have to acknowledge the very real, very necessary opportunity here.
Sure, lay it out.
Let's say a regional district in the Midwest wants to buy an abandoned college campus to turn into a seminary prep school.
Okay, great mission opportunity.
Exactly. But under the 1981 rules, the legal pathway to do that without accidentally exposing the entire national church body to the liability of that physical property, it's just murky. It's a legal nightmare.
Right, because if someone trips and falls on that abandoned campus, you really don't want them suing the national church's pension fund.
Precisely. So this overhaul gives that Midwest district a clear, modern tool. They can create a special purpose entity, like an LLC, to hold that property safely.
Which protects the physical and financial capital.
Exactly. It gives the church modern legal shields. It's a huge win for financial capital.
Wait, hold on, though. Let me push back on this because it sounds almost too neat.
Okay, go for it.
If updating the rules is genuinely just about protecting the church from liability, where's the trap? Why is there a massive manual attached to it? A $200,000 compliance officer sounds like the literal definition of a castle, just pure bureaucracy. Is this overhaul ignoring the reality of modern corporate risk, or is there a real castle risk here?
That is exactly the friction point the guide highlights. The castle risk isn't the desire for legal protection. The risk is how you build the oversight. This overhaul requires any church agency to get approval from the Central Board of Directors before they can even create or acquire one of these entities.
Wait, before they even create it?
Yes. They have to submit governing documents, risk management plans, financial projections.
Which makes total sense if you are a massive national board. But what if you're a tiny mission agency and you're just trying to set up a small holding company for a local community center?
Well, then it becomes this overwhelming drain on their intellectual and financial capital. I mean, they basically have to hire lawyers just to navigate the church's internal application process.
Wow, yeah. That's a huge barrier.
But the deeper issue, and the guide really flags this, is the waiver authority and how they redefine property.
Okay, explain that.
The new rules give the Central Board of Directors the power to just waive certain requirements for these entities. And furthermore, it explicitly states that the property of a passive investment entity, say a massive stock portfolio, is not considered the property of the national church.
Which, again, is the legal shield, right? You separate the assets to protect them from lawsuits.
Yes, legally that's exactly what it is. But what happens to transparency?
Wow.
If millions of dollars in assets are moved into these special purpose entities and passive investment entities, and the central board has the power to waive the reporting requirements behind closed doors, the average person sitting in a pew completely loses sight of where the church's temporal goods actually are.
It creates a governance skyscraper without stairs.
Exactly. You build a legal fortress that is so secure even the people who own it can't see inside.
And the guide uses a great phrase for this. It says, in church governance, sunlight isn't gossip. It's stewardship with windows.
Stewardship with windows.
It's so good. So if you're a delegate staring at this massive corporate overhaul, how do you fix it without throwing out those necessary legal protections? I mean, you can't just vote no and leave the church vulnerable under 1981 rules.
Right. You don't kill the resolution. The floor strategy here is you amend it for transparency.
Okay, what's the tactical move?
The Mike phrase here, the highly specific addition you offer, is you move to require a triennial public report.
Every 3 years.
Yes. Every 3 years, the board must publish a list of all special purpose entities, all waivers they granted, the risks they addressed, and the financial exposure.
So you let them build the legal shield, but you absolutely force them to hand over the map.
Exactly. It's the ultimate play for low control and high accountability. You aren't micromanaging the new compliance officer.
Right, you're not in their office every day.
You're just saying, hey, if you form these entities, tell us they exist.
Now, what if the sheer size of this overhaul is just too much to process? Because we're talking about sweeping changes to property definitions, new agency categories, executive powers, all just bundled into one vote.
So that brings up a really fascinating parliamentary maneuver that the guide suggests, which is dividing the question.
Great, how does that work?
When a single proposal has too many disparate parts, when it's a lot of potato salad in one Tupperware, Robert's Rules allows you to split it up into separate votes.
So you could literally force a vote on the basic, non-controversial cleanup of the 1981 language first. Get that out of the way.
Exactly.
And then, as a completely separate vote, you debate the $200,000 compliance officer and the new waiver authorities.
Which really protects the intellectual capital of the room. It stops delegates from being forced to swallow a bitter pill just to get the medicine.
That is such a smart tactic. And what's incredibly telling about how complex this all is that there's a companion resolution sitting right next to it on the docket, 9-16, which is entirely dedicated to reviewing the fallout of this exact overhaul.
Right. It literally says, let's pass this massive corporate change now, but then immediately commission the national boards and the chief mission officer to review it for mission alignment and report back in 2029.
And the guide flags that as a massive red flag for relational capital.
Oh, totally. Because it's a review done entirely from the castle balcony.
Right, without ever talking to the field.
Exactly. If you want to know how a massive corporate compliance overhaul affects the actual mission field, you cannot just ask the corporate compliance officers.
Right, because if the review is done only by national executives, they're just going to look at their spreadsheets, see that liability is down, and declare the whole thing a massive success.
Meanwhile, that Midwest district trying to buy the college campus has been tied up in compliance paperwork for 3 years, and they lost the real estate deal.
Precisely. So the fix for that review process, the Mike phrase here, is to move to amend 9-16 to mandate consultation with the field.
Yes.
You amend it to legally require the committee to interview districts, local church planters, and leaders in rural, urban, and ethnic ministry contexts.
You force the balcony to walk down to the street level.
Because at the end of the day, the structure has to serve the mission, not the other way around. What's fascinating here is we see a clear tension between protecting temporal goods and ensuring that those protections don't accidentally throttle grassroots ministry.
It's that constant kingdom over castle balancing act.
Okay, so we spent a lot of time on bricks, mortar, and corporate liability. But a church isn't a real estate holding company, right? It's people.
It's entirely people.
And the moment you centralize corporate control, the immediate friction point becomes, how do the people at the local level actually push back? Which brings us to segment 2, representation and the balance of power. Resolutions 9-14, 9-13, and 9-15.
This is where we move from physical capital to relational and intellectual capital. How delegates and districts actually share power.
Let's start with 9-14. This is the ultimate emergency brake.
Oh yeah, the special district convention.
Right. So to understand why this is so explosive, we really have to look at the current rule book.
Right.
Right now, if a regional district, say the district covering Texas, needs to call an emergency special convention outside of its normal cycle, only the district president can call it.
Which creates just a staggering constitutional conundrum.
Yeah. Play that out for us.
What if the crisis in the district is the district president?
Right.
What if there's a severe theological breach or a massive ethical failure, and the district needs to call a convention to hold him accountable or even remove him? Under the current rules, they literally have to ask the very man they are investigating to please convene the meeting for his own removal.
Which is obviously never going to happen. It's a structural catch-22. So this proposal on the table, 9-14, it creates a bypass.
Exactly.
It says a special convention can be called without the president's consent in 2 ways, either by the agreement of 3/4 of the local circuits or by a majority of the district vice presidents.
And on the surface, this is a massive restoration of relational capital.
For sure.
It builds trust because it proves the system has actual checks and balances. It ensures that local congregations acting together have an emergency brake they can pull if leadership just goes completely rogue.
But let me play devil's advocate here, because the huddle question for this one is pretty intense. Could this mechanism be abused to call unnecessary conventions. I mean, 3/4 of circuits sounds high. But in a highly polarized environment, you give people an emergency brake, and suddenly every time the train hits a bump, someone is yanking it.
That is the exact castle risk, the guide points out. They call it factional warfare with registration badges.
Factional warfare. Wow.
If a highly motivated, well-funded faction within a district is just unhappy about a minor administrative decision, they could use this mechanism to constantly call special conventions.
And the cost of that would be catastrophic.
It paralyzes the district's actual ministry. It completely drains financial capital because hosting a convention costs tens of thousands of dollars. And it absolutely incinerates relational capital by turning the church into this perpetual battleground.
So how do you balance that? Because you absolutely need the emergency brake, but you don't want people pulling it just because they don't like, the music playing in the dining car.
Right. So the floor tactic here is to tighten the threshold or limit the scope.
Great, how?
A delegate could propose an amendment to raise the requirement from 3/4 of circuits to, say, 4/5.
Make it harder to trigger.
Exactly. Or, and this is probably more strategic, you limit the scope of the convention. You amend it so that a special convention called by this bypass method can only address the specific single issue that triggered it.
Oh, that's smart. No other business, no general complaining.
Right. Limit the blast radius. That severely lowers the incentive to use it just for political theater.
That makes total sense. Now, speaking of how local areas are represented, there is a massive shift proposed in 9-13 for how electoral circuits are defined.
Right, the electoral circuit parameters.
For anyone not steeped in this, an electoral circuit is basically the local grouping of churches that gets to send a voting delegate to the national convention.
And the proposal here adopts recommendations from a recent task force that completely redefines the math of how these circuits are built.
Yeah, it shifts the definition from counting congregations to counting parishes.
Because demographically, you have a lot of situations where one pastor is serving 2 or 3 tiny churches, so they are grouping them by the parish unit instead.
Right, and it sets a hard standard. It says each circuit must represent an aggregate confirmed membership of between 1,500 and 10,000 people and at least 6 parishes. And, crucially, it removes the historical exceptions that allowed smaller, spread-out circuits to exist. Okay, wait. If you remove the exceptions to that rule, what happens to tiny, spread-out rural congregations?
That is the big question.
Because the math works fine in a dense suburb of Chicago, right? You can get 6 parishes and 2,000 people within a 5-mile radius. But what happens in the middle of Montana? What happens in the Dakotas? If you force them to hit those numbers, you're creating an electoral circuit that covers half a state.
And that is a devastating hit to physical and relational capital.
Huge hit.
The task force is trying to do a good thing, right? They're trying to build bridges and create this uniform, fair standard for the whole country. But by eliminating the exceptions, they're placing a massive travel and participation burden on rural ministry.
Oh, absolutely.
Just imagine asking a lay delegate who's a farmer in Wyoming to drive 6 hours just to attend a Tuesday night circuit meeting. You're effectively disenfranchising them through geography.
So if you're a delegate from Wyoming, do you just try to rate the whole thing down? Just keep the old messy system?
Well, no, because the standardization is still a worthy goal. The brilliant play here, the mic phrase from the guide, is an accountability amendment.
Okay, what is it?
You step to the mic and say, we will accept these new parameters, but we move to require district-level reviews of travel burdens and participation barriers for rural, remote, and ethnic contexts.
Well, that's clever. You don't kill the rule, but you force the system to immediately measure the pain it's causing.
Exactly. It's basically saying, we'll test drive your new car, but you have to install a dashboard camera that records every time we hit a pothole.
I love that. It's low control, high accountability. It forces the central planners to confront the reality of the local geography.
And we see a really similar dynamic with 9-15, which is the proposal regarding the election of the Synod president.
Right. So this proposal basically just encourages congregations to update their contact info and encourages regional presidents to help them vote.
Which is nice, but institutional encouragement rarely moves the needle on actual participation.
Right. Please vote doesn't work if the system itself is confusing.
Exactly.
So the tactical move here is to push past mere encouragement and demand actual tools. You add a requirement for simple, plain language election participation tools. Demand a post-election turnout summary broken down by district.
Keep it low control but high accountability.
Exactly. If you want to increase relational capital and trust, Don't just tell people to vote. Make it impossible for them to be confused by the process.
If you step back and look at all three of these issues, the special conventions, the rural circuits, the presidential voting, they're all wrestling with the exact same core tension.
Which is?
As a massive organization standardizes, how does the local marginalized voice maintain its power?
The system has to serve the local voice, not silence it with uniformity. Okay, so we've looked at the liability and we've looked at local representation. But what happens when the standardization reaches the very top of the org chart?
Reshaping the executive deck.
Exactly. Segment 3, Resolutions 9-08, 9-09, and 9-10. The proposals on the table for the national executive offices are just a massive reshuffling.
And these changes are deeply interconnected. They are the classic corporate move, consolidate to streamline.
Let's start with 9-08, the creation of the Chief Operating Officer, the COO. The proposal takes two incredibly powerful existing roles: the Chief Administrative Officer, the CAO, who runs the daily machinery, and the Chief Financial Officer, the CFO, who holds the purse strings. And it merges them into one single COO position.
And the rationale in the text is textbook corporate efficiency. Running a massive national body requires immense operational oversight, and having a single COO theoretically eliminates bottlenecks between administration and finance.
But look at the blind spot this creates, especially for financial capital.
Yeah, what's the castle risk here?
Does consolidating two massive roles actually streamline administration, or does it dangerously weaken your internal controls?
Right, where are the checks and balances?
It's like making the guy who cooks the food also the guy who writes the Yelp reviews. In a healthy organization, you want the person spending the money and the person tracking the money to be two different people, right? Checking each other's math.
Exactly. In governance, tension is often a feature, not a bug. Those checks and balances are supposed to slow things down slightly to prevent catastrophic errors. If you merge those roles, your internal auditing better be made of titanium.
So how do you handle that on the floor? Because you probably can't stop the consolidation, right?
Yeah.
Corporate efficiency is a very seductive argument.
You're right, it is. So you use the accountability parachute. The Mike phrase here is you move to amend by adding an annual summary during the first triennium.
First 3 years.
Right. This report must explicitly evaluate efficiency, internal controls, and risk management.
So you force them to prove the concept in real time. You said this would be safer and faster. Prove it every 12 months.
Exactly.
But here's where it gets really interesting, because creating this COO triggers a massive domino effect across the rest of the executive floor. By beefing up the operations side, they are simultaneously stripping power from the Chief Mission Officer in Resolution 9-09.
Let's look at the history of the Chief Mission Officer, the CMO, for a second.
Yeah, give us the background.
This position was created after a massive restructuring back in 2010. The goal was to have a single, high-level executive whose entire job was to drive the programmatic gospel mission of the church, both national and international. But over the last decade, the corporate side of the church noticed that the mission officer's duties were overlapping with the administrative duties.
Right, because the mission officer was also managing communications and fundraising.
Exactly.
So this new proposal, 9-09, swoops in and says, we're going to take the business aspects of communications, public relations, and fund development away from the mission officer and hand them over to the new Chief Operating Officer. The logic being, the mission officer can now purely focus on ministry, distraction-free.
It sounds perfectly logical on a whiteboard.
Sure does.
But the castle risk here is profound, and it threatens the core spiritual capital of the church.
How so?
If you take communications and fund development away from the person in charge of the mission, who is actually driving the narrative.
Right. If the guy who understands the reality of church planting in inner-city Detroit doesn't control the microphone that tells the church about it, and doesn't control the fundraising apparatus that pays for it, you risk accidentally sidelining the mission entirely. The operations side, the spreadsheet guys, they start driving the bus.
It separates the mission from the megaphone and the money. The huddle question the guide poses is, does this keep mission from being separated from communication and funding decisions?
So what's the tactical move?
The move isn't necessarily to reverse the org chart, but to amend it to demand clear coordination. You write into the bylaw that the COO and the CMO must jointly report on how mission priorities are explicitly reflected in the corporate budget and donor engagement.
You legally mandate that the spreadsheet serves the mission,
Exactly.
which perfectly explains the third executive domino, Resolution 9-10, the Pastoral Formation Committee.
Yes.
This is the group that oversees how the seminaries train new pastors. And because they just redefined the chief mission officer to be less administrative, the new proposal completely removes the mission officer from this committee, replacing them with a regional president and a presidential appointee.
And again, on a whiteboard, maybe that looks cleaner. But think about the intellectual capital you're losing here.
It's massive.
The Pastoral Formation Committee is designing the training for the next generation of men heading into the field.
And you just kicked the guy in charge of the field out of the room.
Exactly. If we connect this to the bigger picture, removing the CMO might make structural sense, but the church loses vital mission field intelligence.
Right. Who is going to look at the seminary curriculum and say, hey, this is great theology, but the guys we are sending to rural Appalachia or urban immigrant communities are completely unprepared for the actual context they're walking into?
The mission officer is uniquely positioned to provide that exact boots-on-the-ground intelligence.
So the fix here, the Mike phrase, is so simple it hurts.
Let's hear it.
You just amend 9-10 to invite the CMO back into the room as a non-voting advisory participant, specifically for deployment and mission field needs.
It's the perfect application of kingdom over castle. Don't let a clean org chart prevent the training centers from hearing what the harvest actually requires.
Okay, so we've reorganized the corporate liability, we've debated the local representation, we've completely reshuffled the executive deck. But here's the reality of organizational psychology. None of these structural changes will work if there isn't broad foundational trust across the entire church body.
That's true in any organization.
If the people sitting in the pews think the system is rigged, the machine grinds to a halt, no matter how efficient the COO is. Which brings us to segment 4, clearing the fog. Trust, transparency, and routine maintenance. Resolutions 9-02, 03, 04, and 17.
This bundle of proposals deals directly with spiritual and intellectual capital by attempting to clear up the fog of bureaucracy.
Let's look at the conflict of interest policy first, 9-02. The proposal clarifies the expectations for all agency boards and staff. It requires annual disclosures and sets removal procedures if someone violates them.
Now, obviously, managing conflicts of interest is essential for financial and relational capital. You cannot have board members voting on contracts that benefit their own businesses.
Right, that's just basic governance.
Yeah. The risk here isn't the existence of the policy. The risk is that if the process is highly legalistic and happens entirely behind closed doors, it breeds suspicion.
Right, if a board member quietly resigns and nobody explains why, the rumor mill just goes into overdrive.
Exactly.
The huddle question is, does this build trust without turning every relationship into a courtroom drama?
So the accountability play is to demand plain language transparency. The fix from the guide's amendments is you demand plain language disclosure forms for 9-02. You demand that recusal expectations are publicly documented and that the board publishes a brief annual confirmation that the procedures were actually followed.
We check the math. Everyone recused themselves when they were supposed to. Here is the proof. It builds trust without the courtroom drama.
Exactly.
And we see the exact same need for transparency with the doctrinal review process in Resolution 9-03.
Doctrinal review is the process the church uses to ensure that published materials are faithful to its theology. It is the ultimate protector of spiritual capital.
But the fog around it can be incredibly frustrating. I mean, if an author submits a book or a Bible study to doctrinal review, it can disappear into the ether for a year.
Oh, easily.
People don't know the timelines, they don't know who's reading it, and they don't know the communication process.
So again, you don't dismantle the review process, you amend it to require a plain language guide. You force the commission to publish exactly what the scope of the review is, what the expected timelines are, and how confidentiality is handled.
Because if the rules are only understood by a handful of canon lawyers, you build a castle. But if the rules are accessible to every pastor and teacher, you empower the kingdom.
Perfectly said.
Now, I want to touch on the danger of bundled resolutions, too. Resolution 9-04 is just titled Governance Clarifications, and it covers a laundry list of housekeeping items. What happens if a secretary is incapacitated, how electronic voting credentials work, minor bylaw tweaks.
This is the classic Trojan horse of administration.
Right, they look so innocent.
But when an organization bundles 20 minor tweaks into one omnibus vote, it is incredibly easy for a sweeping shift in executive authority to just slip through completely unnoticed.
The tactic here is pure mental discipline. The guide suggests you don't necessarily fight the clarifications, but you demand a map. You stand at the microphone and ask the chairman for a plain language summary of each clarification before implementation.
You make them identify exactly what bylaw is changing, what the practical effect is on the ground, and exactly which officer is gaining authority.
Make them say it out loud on the record so everyone knows who is responsible.
And finally, in this category, we have Resolution 9-17, which is a blanket declination of various overtures.
Right. This is when a bunch of local districts or congregations send in proposals, maybe about term limits or representation, and the National Committee bundles them all together and says, no, thank you, we decline to act on these.
Usually it's because the proposals were poorly written or conflicted with existing rules.
The procedural logic for declining them is usually sound. But the castle risk is burying real concerns just because the proposed solutions were flawed.
Right. Just because a local church proposed a constitutionally messy way to enforce term limits doesn't mean the conversation about term limits isn't valid.
Exactly. So my phrase is, you amend to explicitly encourage continued study on representation and term limits through proper channels. It preserves the worthy concerns. It says, we can't accept this specific legal fix, but we value your relational capital enough to keep the conversation alive.
Okay, so we have covered an immense amount of ground. We've gone from 1981 corporate liability to the intricacies of pastoral formation.
But if you are a delegate or just someone trying to follow this incredibly complex process, how do you actually survive the convention floor? I mean, when the timer is counting down, the microphones are live, and parliamentary procedure is just flying around the room, how do you manage your own intellectual capital?
This is where we get into segment 5, breaking down the tactical floor strategy, the cheat sheet from the guide, A through E.
Yes, let's arm the listener.
Because you really have to triage your attention. Not every resolution deserves 30 minutes of debate.
Let's talk about A and B, ranked priorities versus the consent calendar.
Okay.
The consent calendar is a parliamentary mechanism designed to pass routine, non-controversial items in a single massive block vote without any debate.
Things like, slightly adjusting the size of a financial board, like 9-05 on LCEF board size, or clarifying a supermajority in 9-06.
Right, and 9-07, 9-12. The biggest mistake a delegate can make is dragging an item off the consent calendar just to make a minor semantic point.
Oh, absolutely. It is vital to save your intellectual capital, your mental energy, and floor time for the resolutions that actually change the Synod structure. If you burn 45 minutes of floor time debating whether a committee should have 3 people or 4 people, you are draining the mental energy of the entire room.
It's a decoy for your intellectual capital.
Exactly. You must save the mental endurance of the convention for the heavyweights. 9-11, 9-14, 9-13, 9-08. Pick your battles and let the routine maintenance pass quietly.
But when you do step up to fight a battle, you need the right tools. And the absolute best tool we've seen in all of this material is Section C, the Master Amendment paragraph.
It really is the Swiss Army knife of governance.
It's a reusable paragraph to deploy anytime a resolution is vague. I'm going to read this slowly because the psychology behind it is just brilliant.
Go for it.
Here is the text. Resolved, that implementation of this resolution serve congregations, districts, schools, agencies, workers, and gospel mission. Preserve clear Lutheran confession and proper accountability. Avoid unnecessary centralization, and provide a brief report before the 2029 convention describing governance changes made, 5 capitals stewarded, risks addressed, and lessons learned.
Think about what that paragraph does. It doesn't kill the underlying resolution, which means it won't immediately trigger a defensive war with the committee.
Right.
Instead, it baptizes the resolution in the kingdom over castle framework.
It legally binds the implementation to the 5 capitals.
Yes. It forces whoever is executing the new rule to publicly measure their success, not by corporate efficiency, but by how well they served the local mission, avoided centralization, and stewarded those capitals over the next 3 years. It is the ultimate accountability parachute.
But let's say you don't even want to go through the hassle of proposing an amendment Because offering an amendment means you need a second, you need a debate, and you need a majority vote.
It's a whole process.
What if you just want to get the committee on the record? This brings us to D and E on the cheat sheet, questions instead of amending.
This is a highly underutilized but incredibly powerful parliamentary tactic, asking a question rather than making a motion.
It's the Columbo approach to church governance.
I love that.
You wander up to the microphone, scratch your head, and say, just one more thing, Mr. Chairman.
It's fraternal, it's polite, but it forces accountability on the record.
Let's role play how this works. Let's take the massive COO consolidation. Instead of fighting it, you step to the mic and ask a hit from the cheat sheet.
Mr. Chairman, how exactly will the board evaluate whether this COO consolidation improves efficiency without weakening our internal financial controls?
By asking that, you force the chairman to publicly state their control mechanisms, and whatever they say is instantly recorded in the official permanent minutes of the convention.
Or what about the massive corporate entity overhaul? You ask, will every board provide a current delegated authority summary? Or will the board commit to providing a plain language implementation guide and a full public report on these new entities by 2029?
By just asking a polite fraternal question, you force the committee to write their promises into the permanent legal record without ever having to win a majority vote on the floor. It is incredibly strategic. You secure the accountability without triggering the political friction.
Because ultimately, all of this parliamentary maneuvering, all of these bylaw debates, it all comes back to a core theological concept.
Right.
The left-hand kingdom.
Okay, let's unpack that jargon for a second. Left-hand kingdom.
So in classic two kingdoms theology, the left hand refers to how God governs the temporal physical world. It's about order, justice, property, rules, and human resources.
Okay, and the right hand.
The right hand is the spiritual realm, the preaching of the gospel, the administration of the sacraments, the forgiveness of sins.
So corporate bylaws, compliance officers, and electoral circuits, that is all left-hand kingdom stuff.
Exactly. Governance is simply a left-hand kingdom tool. It is the scaffolding. It exists entirely to manage the physical reality so that the right-hand kingdom, the actual mission of the church, can flourish unhindered.
Right.
If the scaffolding gets so heavy that it crushes the building, you have failed. Structure should serve the risen Christ, his congregations, and the harvest, not castle maintenance.
And that synthesizes this entire deep dive perfectly. I mean, the convention floor is going to be a flurry of parliamentary procedure, points of order, and legal debate.
It's going to be chaotic.
It is incredibly easy to get lost in the weeds of whether a committee has 6 members or 7. But your true north, your compass through all of this noise, is that kingdom over castle lens.
You have to ruthlessly evaluate every single proposal. Does this massive corporate liability shield protect the church's assets so they can fund a new mission plant? If yes, it serves the kingdom.
Right.
But if a new rule regarding electoral circuits is so rigid that a rural congregation in Wyoming can't figure out how to send a delegate, well, it's just building a castle.
So what does this all mean for you as you head into Committee 9? Whether you are holding a voting keypad on the floor or you are just watching the machinery of your church operate from afar, think about this.
Yeah, what's the takeaway?
When eternity looks back at this 2026 convention, will the legacy be the administrative bylaws that were passed, or the gospel witness those bylaws unleashed? The machinery exists for the harvest. Keep your eyes on the harvest.
Well said.
Thanks for diving deep with us today.